I don't know how many of you heard my conversion story, my first talk, but just very quickly, in case you didn't, very quick recap. I had been working on a novel. I was 23 years old. I had been working on a novel for 2.5 years. It was my life. It was my God. It was everything. Book controlled my life more than I controlled the lives of the characters inside it. It just was my life. Nothing else mattered than my book. And I guess that was part of the problem, because one night the Lord came to me and just said very clearly, "Cliff, you've been playing with me long enough. If you want me tonight, burn the book." Because the book was my God, and he showed me very clearly that night, "You shall have no other gods before me." And this didn't happen in a vacuum. In the story, I explained a whole bunch of things that had happened, some very bizarre things which just got me to know there had to be more out there than I had originally been led to believe, and how I had been educated. And the bottom line was, after a few hours of some divine human wrestling, knowing nothing about salvation, knowing nothing about the three angels and that message, not having the slightest concept of myself as a sinner. I mean, it was just just was not a conceivable concept to me at that time of my life. I ended up taking that manuscript, 2.5 years of my life, and burning it. And that was the night I became a born-again believer in Jesus, and that was over 30 years ago. Now, my experience that night, burning that novel with the Lord, was just that. It was an experience. It was personal. It was subjective. It was interior. I think anybody standing in the room there wouldn't have heard the Lord talking to me. There was really, many ways, nothing logical, nothing scientific, nothing really commonsensical, nothing I think from any academic disciplines could have explained it. Oh, I think some psychologists might have had some fun trying to work through that one, but doesn't mean a thing to me, because I know what happened to me that night. And what happened to me was mystical, it was supernatural, and it transcended reality. I mean, it transcended rationality. Kind of like Saul's little road trip to Damascus. Now, I don't like to equate myself with the Apostle Paul, but the one way I can relate to Paul was that when Saul of Tarsus was Saul of Tarsus, what did his study, what did his logic, what did his reasoning get it to do? It got him to kill Christians. That's what his study got him to do. And anyway, he's going along, he's walking along, he's going over to Damascus. He's going to kill a few more believers, and he has this trans-rational, this supernatural, this personal experience with Christ. And in a sense, I say he was moving along the horizontal realm, and he got pulled up, given a whole new set of first principles, a whole new set of premises, and then dropped right back into the realm of the horizontal. Well, pretty much that's exactly what happened to me that night. I burned my novel and became a believer in Jesus. Okay? I mean, you read Apostle Paul's conversion story. Tell me how rational, how logical, how scientific that experience was. Well, anyway, I have this experience with the Lord. And the next day, I had my very first Bible study. And I was in a health food store. Those of you who heard the story, it was a health food store that I had gone to. And I had my very first Bible study, and it was on Daniel 2. And they took me to the sequence of those kingdoms: Babylon, Media, Persia, Greece, and pagan Rome. And then when we came to the feet and toes, iron and clay, and the text in the statute said, and they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men, but they shall not cleave one to another, even as iron is not mixed with clay. Symbolic for modern Europe. I mean, I had lived in Europe. I was been over there, just came back from there. They shall mingle themselves, but not cleave one to another. And I remember I just burst into tears. And I looked up and I said, it's all true. It's all true. I mean, I had right here in my hands was powerful confirmation. Not just for God, but for his foreknowledge and his sovereignty. Here on the pages in front of me was logical, objective, public evidence for my belief. With Daniel 2, the experience that I had the night before, that personal, subjective experience, was now underpinned by a platform that remains as solid, as faith-affirming, and as rational now as it was to me over 30 years ago. And that's what I want to look at today a little bit. Because, I did come to Christ totally through an experience. And experiences are just that. They're experiences. Personal, unique to ourselves. And over time, some of these experiences can tend to fade away. You could tend to forget. How many times did the Lord tell the children of Israel, when you're in the land, teach these things to your children, teach these things, lest ye forget the things which thine eyes have seen, unless they depart from your heart all the days of your life. And sometimes I don't have good experiences. And sometimes I don't feel close to God. But no matter how I feel or the experiences I might be having at the moment, Daniel 2 is always there. Never changing, solid, logical, and rational, giving me solid, logical, and rational reasons for belief that can be very handy at moments when you might not feel full of faith or full of belief. And that's what I want to do, is I want to go back and just look at some things in Daniel 2, review a little, and maybe look at it from a little bit different of a perspective. For starters, if you read Daniel 2, I mean, in many ways, the story itself isn't exactly brimming with what we would call logic and rationality. I mean, the story itself, come on, to a modern mind. This king has a dream, and the king can't remember the dream, and he calls the wise men in, and tells the wise men, tell him the dream and the interpretation, and they can't do it, and the king gets ticked off and says he's going to kill all the wise men of Babylon. And so they go to kill Daniel and his friends, and Daniel asks for a reprieve. And he and his buddies go home and they pray to the God of heaven. And the God of heaven reveals himself to stuff, and he goes to the king and he tells the king the dream. And the king, that must have been it. And the king says, that's right. And they're all saved. And Daniel saves the day. I mean, hardly the logic of geometry, to be sure. However, on the other hand, logic and reason just exude from this prophecy itself. How could a man living 600-700 years before Christ unfold the history of the world from his time right up through ours and even beyond, were he not divinely inspired? Without supernatural intervention, how could he have gone through the ages, through the millennia, depicting so accurately the rise and fall and breakup of those empires? I mean, Daniel, centuries and centuries before Christ, lays out the history of the world. I mean, we're not talking about some flighty, magical thing of, I think it was somebody given magic goggles so they can interpret the Book of Mormon, or some girls having visions of the Virgin Mary appearing to them somewhere in Portugal. I mean, we are talking about something as firm and broad and as unchanging as world history. I mean, think about it. If God wanted to give us a firm foundation, a logical firm foundation for belief, we as human beings stuck here on this planet, what broader, firmer, more immutable foundation could he given us than the history of the world in order to help build a solid foundation for faith? I mean, the world could blow up tomorrow. There'll have always been a Babylon. There'll have always been a Medo-Persia. There'll have always been a Greece. And there'll have always been a Rome. And not only have that foundation, it's a foundation rooted in something that is as immutable and unchangeable as the past. I mean, even God can't change the past. It's there, rock solid, as firm as the world itself, and as immutable and as solid as the past itself. Thus, this is what God has given us to help ground our faith in something very rational and very logical and very powerful. This has been so powerful, in fact, that people have been trying to get around it and find ways to get around this for centuries now, because they see the power of this prophecy in affirming belief not only in God, but in the God of the Bible. See, the problem is, if you don't believe in God, if you don't believe in the supernatural, or if you don't want to believe in God, if you don't want to believe in the supernatural, then you're going to have to come up with something to deal with this prophecy. You're going to have to kind of come up with something to explain it away, because it presents on its face some very powerful evidence for belief not only in God, but for belief in the God of the Bible. I mean, some folks have tried to explain Daniel 2 away. And one of the most firmly entrenched, one of the most, quote, successful, and I mean successful only in the sense that it's a view that has been pretty much been bought by almost everybody, almost the entire Christian world, with few exceptions, Seventh-day Adventists being one of the last of those exceptions, is what is called the Maccabean hypothesis. And it's a view that was basically claims that the book wasn't written when says it was written, but was written many centuries later. It was written after the events themselves. Now, as far as we know, this view was first promulgated by a Neoplatonist philosopher by the name of Porphyry. And his dates are about 234 to 305 AD. So this is a few centuries after Christ, who argued that Daniel had been written in the 2nd century BC by Jews who were under siege from the Seleucid Greeks. And this is a view that basically infects almost all of Christendom today, the vast, vast, vast majority of Bible commentaries that you would pick up on the book of Daniel will give you this view. And you know the story, after the breakup of Greece with Alexander the Great, broke up into the 4 different kingdoms, and one of them was the Seleucids. And one of these was a ruler named Antiochus Epiphanes, and he came and he persecuted the Jews, and he sacrificed pigs in the temple and so on and so forth. And the Jews ultimately revolted against him, and it's a feast that the Jews celebrate today when they finally overthrew this guy and cleaned out the temple and so on around 164 to 167 BC. That's when they believe Daniel was written. And it was written celebrating the Maccabean revolt against Antiochus Epiphanes, which, as I said, is the Jews celebrate today Hanukkah, the Feast of Lights. It's one of the few holidays we ever celebrated in our family, and you can see they call them the menorahs, the lampstands, the branched candlesticks that you see in the windows. Now, the point in all this history, the point in all this, is that they're saying that Daniel wrote, it is said, and there's a Latin phrase for this, and my Latin, excuse my Latin, it's, if I butcher it, vaticacina ex eventu, which phrase means written after the happening took place. In other words, according to this theory, even though Daniel dates itself to 600-700 years before Christ, this book was really written hundreds and hundreds of years later. So what he's not writing about is the future. He's writing about the past. He's writing about things that already happened, but he's just making you think that he's writing it about the future. So they're trying to dupe you. They're trying to dupe us. They're trying to make us think he's predicting the future when really all he did is write about the past. Okay, and as I said, this thing has just been bought hook, line, and sinker by most scholars today. However, though there are some who more and more are starting to see the flaws and the weaknesses with it. I mean, and there's a number of reasons that they're starting to see problems. They used to argue that words that were found in it weren't supposedly words that didn't exist around the time that Daniel supposedly wrote it, 6-7 centuries before Christ. Well, they're wrong. They discovered other ancient documents which suddenly, what do you know, those words really were used back then. So that helped diffuse that argument. And supposedly he made some mistakes in the name of a king. Got one of the kings wrong, the name's wrong. Well, recent archaeological discovery showed, what do you know? Daniel actually got the name of the king right. So for all these years they were saying, no, he got it wrong. Turned out Daniel got it right after all. I remember reading one where one scholar just scratched his head, and he just couldn't understand how could Daniel, hundreds and hundreds of years after this time, gotten the name of that king right, because he was utterly assured that Daniel had written it in the 2nd century BC, not back in the 6th century or 7th century. And then there's the problem with the inclusion of the book of Daniel in the Dead Sea Scrolls. Because the Dead Sea Scrolls are dated somewhat about the same time, a few years, some of them later, than the book of Daniel. And, how does a book get canonical in just a few years? The Dead Sea Scrolls are dated just about the time of the book of Daniel, and they said, well, what's this book doing in here so fast, so quickly? It usually takes a long time to become canonical, and the discovery of the book of Daniel in the Dead Sea Scrolls caused quite a bit of a problem for those who tried to argue for a late date for the book of Daniel. And all that's fine, but I think we've got something that is so much more powerful than anything than these arguments. Let's assume for argument's sake that Daniel was written when they said it was written, when the Maccabean hypothesis says it was written, middle of the 2nd century BC. Okay? How could anyone living and writing more than 150 years before the birth of Christ, how could he have predicted with such accuracy the dismantling of the Roman Empire into the smaller nations of what we know of modern Europe that would cleave one to another even as iron is not mixed with clay? I mean, the European nations were fighting each other well into the 20th century. I was just talking to someone the other day. I read an article a couple of weeks ago about how Belgium is now in danger of splitting in two. And the big fight is over who gets to keep Brussels. Okay, I mean, they talk about European unity. It's funny. I live in the Washington, D.C. area. And over time, I know a number of people who work in the intelligence community. Okay, you just can't live in the Washington, D.C. area and not know some spooks. In one degree or another, you got some people, either CIA, NSA, you've got them there. Okay, now it depends. If you live on the Maryland side, you know the NSA people. If you live on the Virginia side, it's the CIA people. In fact, I asked one of my friends one time, I said, you guys in the NSA, do you kill people? And she says, nah, that's the job of the boys across the river, meaning the CIA on the other side of the Potomac. Well, NSA is funny because NSA, I used to live 20 minutes from NSA. And they're just the ones, one of my friends, I said, what do you these people don't even tell their wives what they do. And I try to get something out of my friend about what he did. He says, well, said Cliff, if you like reading other people's mail, the NSA is a nice place to work. But I had a neighbor who worked at NSA right next door. And I had asked him during the breakup of the Soviet Union. Okay, one of my friends said to me one time who worked at NSA, he said, you cannot believe the kind of technology we have to spy on people. He said, you would not believe what we could do. And this was, 20-some years ago. Okay? So you got one of the most powerful, sophisticated spy agencies in the world. I mean, they probably knew every time Gorbachev burped. And I remember I asked my neighbor, as the Soviet Union was collapsing, I said, did you guys have any idea? Did you see this coming? And I never forget. I think I know what this guy did. I just can kind of figure it out after a while. And I remember he just said to me, he said, we are watching this with absolute, utter astonishment. So what is my point? I'm saying a measly year or two before the collapse of the Soviet Union, I mean, the world's greatest political scientists and people using the most sophisticated spy techniques, on and on and on, they never saw it coming. And yet here was a man living supposedly 160 years before Christ, so accurately depicting modern Europe today. I mean, how could he have done that unless he was divinely inspired? See, the whole point of the Maccabean hypothesis, the whole point of it, they could come up with all the arguments they want, but the bottom line, the whole point of the thing was to try to deny the power or even the existence of predicative prophecy, to deny the supernatural. And yet Daniel 2's prophetic reach is so great, extending so far into the future, that it overwhelms this pathetic human attempt to nullify it. I mean, look at the power of Daniel. Porphyry, writing in the 3rd century A.D., was so scared of the book, so scared of the rational evidence it presented for the Bible, that he concocted this idea that it was written hundreds of years later than when it's said. And here's a guy that had to write that 1,800 years ago, because that's how powerful Daniel was 1,800 years ago. If 1,800 years ago the power of Daniel was so strong that they had to come up with this, how much more powerful should the book be for us today, who have seen a lot of prophecy fulfilled that Porphyry and those who first came up with the Maccabean hypotheses never lived to see. And also one simple little point, just worth for whatever it's worth. I mean, if Daniel was so accurate about the future, isn't it logical and reasonable to trust him on something so much easier than making predictions hundreds, if not thousands so years in advance? And that is on the dates he gave for the book himself. He gives specific dates. All the scholars come along and say, no, those dates are all wrong. They're not true. I mean, I don't know. Who are you going to believe? To me, it's a no-brainer. It's not even a discussion, in my think, worth even having. And then there's more. The king's dream in chapter 2 was symbolized by a statue. World history symbolized in sculpture. And the common interpretation, which just isn't an Adventist interpretation, other people have interpreted it this way, the Jews have interpreted it this way, was Babylon, Media Persia, the head was of gold, the silver and arms were breasts, the arms and breasts were of silver, the belly and thighs, brass, the legs, the feet and toes, the legs of iron, pagan Rome, the feet and toes, part of iron, part of clay, the nations of modern Europe, which up until a few centuries ago, people believed. Millions of Christians have interpreted this chapter this way for centuries. It's been in the past few decades, more than ever, in the past few centuries, that they bought into the Maccabean thing. Now, it's interesting. Unlike the first 3 kingdoms, whose metals stop, the gold stops after Babylon. The silver stops after Greece. The iron, the brass stops. The silver stops after Media Persia. The brass stops after Greece. But then you've got the iron. The iron of the 4th kingdom starts in the legs and goes all the way through into the end. So the power that comes up after Greece, the power that comes up after the third kingdom, Greece, symbolized by the iron, goes all the way through until the end, because even in the feet and toes, it's still iron. It's iron mixed with miry clay, but it's still the power that came up after Greece. And what is the only power that comes up after ancient Greece and goes all the way through until the end? Though at one point it changes form. It's only one. It's solely, totally, and only Rome. Pagan and papal Rome. You parallel Daniel 2, you parallel Daniel 7, you parallel Daniel 8, and you'll see the same basic sequence. The power that comes up after Greece, whether it's the little horn power, whether the fourth kingdom in Daniel 7, whatever that, it's the same power. It comes up after Greece and goes all the way down until the very end. And again, what power after Greece goes all the way through? It's the same power. That fourth beast in Daniel 7, the little horn comes out of it. It's still the fourth beast. Daniel 8, you got the little horn power that comes up after Greece, and that little horn power goes down till it's cut off without hands. Daniel 2, Daniel 7, and Daniel 8. Power after Greece, same power at the end. Solely, totally, and only Rome. No matter how politically incorrect. Oh, there's all sorts. I can remember 25, 30 years ago during the height of the Cold War, Spectrum magazine had an article saying, well, it's obvious that our church interpretation is wrong. Our traditional interpretation of Daniel is these prophecies are wrong, and everybody now knows that it really can't be Rome. It's really Soviet communism. You know, just leave it a Spectrum. They get it wrong every time, and they still get it wrong. And some now it's Islam. Some now they're falling, it's Islam. Okay? Doesn't work. Islam didn't come up after Greece. Soviet communism didn't come up after Greece. Only one power did, and it's Rome. And there's another thing, too, that's very important, too, because something that we've had to deal with, it was a legacy that Desmond Ford left us. Daniel 2, Daniel 7, Daniel 2:34, basically, in Daniel 7, it's told that these four great beasts are four kingdoms that will arise from the earth. Daniel 2 is told very clearly that these are four kingdoms that are going to arise. Daniel 7, the four great beasts are four kingdoms that will arise from the earth. Daniel 8 not only describes the empires, but names two of them, Media, Persia, and Greece. So the point is, if you put Daniel 2, you put Daniel 2 names Babylon as the first kingdom. Daniel 7 puts together and says there are four kingdoms. Daniel 8 put it together, names two other ones. So if you put Daniel 2, Daniel 7, and Daniel 8 together, three of the four kingdoms are named for you. Babylon is named for you. Media, Persia is named for you. Greece is named for you. Okay? No guesswork there. No speculation. Babylon, Media, Persia, Greece, named for you. And you throw in the New Testament. You throw in the New Testament. The New Testament unfolds against the background of what kingdom? What kingdom all the way through? And a decree came out from Caesar Augustus that all the world should be taxed. Caesar Augustus, who are we talking about here? And Jesus, when he talked about the destruction of Jerusalem by Rome, linked the destruction with the book of Daniel. He says, when you therefore you see the abomination of desolation, language right from Daniel, spoken of by Daniel the prophet, naming Daniel, stand in the holy place. Then let him that in the mountains be in Judea flee into the mountains. Everybody knows this is referring to the destruction of Jerusalem by the Romans. No one's going to question that. So the point is, between you put these together, Babylon is mentioned by name, Media Persia is mentioned by name, Greece is mentioned by name, and you tie in the New Testament, you've got Rome mentioned by name. And this is important because Des Ford left us with this nonsense legacy of what they call the apotalismatic principle. Maybe some of you've heard it, and it's fantasy. And it's this idea, well, in one era these kingdoms mean one thing, and another age it means another thing, and another era it means another thing, and in different times and different places these things mean different things, and on and on and on. And you buy into what the prophecy can mean anything you want. There is not a shred of evidence at all in the book of Daniel for anything like multiple fulfillments in the book of Daniel. This apotalismatic principle is just pure nonsense. It was just another one of Des Ford's ways to try to destroy our understanding of the 1844 prophecy. I mean, there's just nothing in there for multiple fulfillments. It names the kingdoms for you. So where do you get the idea? In one era it means one thing, one era it means another. It's nonsense, it's fantasy, and our church has taken a firm stand rejecting the day-year principle. That doesn't deny in certain places you can have multiple fulfillments, but don't give me multiple fulfillments in a prophecy where where you're told there are 4 kingdoms and they're named for you. 3 out of the 4 named in Daniel, you bring in the New Testament, and the 4th is so obvious what it could be. Anyway, I don't want to focus only on the past, on decayed and dead kingdoms, because what the chapter presents really is a future hope. And see, think about this. From our perspective today, look at how well Daniel handled all the things that came before us. Babylon came and went as predicted. Media Persia came and went as predicted. Greece came and went as predicted. Rome came, pagan Rome came, and then eventually it got broken up into the nations of modern Europe. We've lived, all that is behind us. From our perspective, from the perspective we have today, there's only one more kingdom. There's only one more kingdom that hasn't come, and that's the last kingdom. The final kingdom, the one that was the stone cut out without hands. The 5th and final kingdom of Daniel 2. The one that Jesus bought with us for his blood. See, the statue of Daniel 2, symbolic of this world, is destroyed, crushed by a stone cut out without hands, and nothing will be left of these earthly empires. According to Daniel 2, this earth as we know it and all its glory and all its powers and all those things are going to be gone. It says that no trace of them remain at all. All that remains is this final kingdom which crushes and everything else is destroyed. And the kingdom that was, basically it says it's like the chaff of the summer threshing floor that the wind blows away until no trace remains. So again, Babylon came and went as predicted, Media Persia as predicted, Greece is predicted, Rome is predicted. The only one from our slot in history is the final kingdom. The last one, the one symbolized by the stone cut out without hands. I mean, Daniel was right on the first 4. I mean, don't you think it'd be kind of foolish not to trust him on the last one? I tell a story. If you heard, I grew up Miami Beach. And when you turned 18, there was a rite of passage. I hadn't quite turned 18 yet, but I looked it, so I just went. You went to the dog track to watch the dogs race. And, the greyhounds, they'd run around the track. And I can remember my first time, I thought I was hot stuff walking into the dog track, Walked in with a friend of mine, and they didn't ID me because I was only 17. If they would have, they wouldn't have let me in. You had to be 18. And I can remember walking into the dog track, and I walked in, and something caught my attention. And I wasn't sure what it was, and I'm stopping, and I'm looking, and I'm thinking, there's something saying something to me here. And I wasn't sure what it was. And I just had to stop and think about it. Because I said, there's something talking to me here. And then I realized what it was. Because you walk in, and there are 12 ticket windows. 12 ticket windows. And then I noticed something. 10 of the 12 windows took your money. And 2 of the 12 gave it out. Okay? Gave you your winnings. And so instantly it hit me, not only were the odds against me for winning or against anybody for winning, but I knew what the odds against me winning were. They were 5-to-1 odds against me winning. And it just hit me right when I walked in that this is a losing proposition. And kind of the funny thing about it is I put $5 down on a dog and won 35 on it my first time there. And the funny thing is the name of the dog was Classy Kim, and the name of my wife is Kim. So, but that's another story. But anyway, but the point is, I saw the odds. The odds were against you. But now look at what you got with Daniel. Look at the odds here. Babylon, got it right. Medo Persia, got it right. Greece, got it right. Rome, pagan and papal Rome. You want to consider, I think it's always safe just to consider pagan and papal Rome one kingdom, because it really is just one. I'm convinced papal Rome is just nothing but the ancient pagan Greek religion just covered in a veneer of Christianity. It's paganism. I mean, you know what the name of the pagan high priest was? Pontifex Maximus. Sound familiar? Okay. So anyway, he got him right on all of those. Babylon, Medo Persia, Greece, Rome. Look at them one right on. How foolish to bet against them on the last one, the fifth and final kingdom. He got all the other ones right. I'm not going to gamble on the last one. So you see, you got a little bit of odds here. You got a little bit of gambling in your favor here as well, if you lean that way. Plus, in the end, though, as good as that is, we've got a much better reason. And I think I touched on this in an earlier talk. We got a better reason for trusting in that final kingdom, and which comes at the second coming of Jesus. As I said before, and that's the first coming of Jesus. Because think about it, as I said earlier, what good was the purpose of the first coming if you don't have the second? What good was it? Really? Waste of time. Might have done God some good. Might have helped expose Satan before the universe. I was just doing some reading on that, some editing of the quarterly this morning, and the chapter, amazing chapter in Desire of Ages, it is finished. Every time I read that chapter, I just pull more and more out of it, and I just stand more and more in awe of the gift that we've been given, in spirit of prophecy. In that chapter, it is finished. Every time I read it, I just shake my head. It's like unbelievable, the insights that we've been given. But what good does the first coming done for us without the promise of the second coming, without the promise of that fifth and final kingdom? I don't know about you, but I can't think of it doing me any good at all. Because without that, we die and we rot in the ground like, some roadkill, that's something you hit with your car on the side of the road. As I've said before, Jesus taught us a nice moral system. Fine. I don't need Jesus to have a nice moral system. I think, you can get plenty of good moral systems, and you can live good moral lives. You don't need Christianity to live a moral life. You need Christianity to have a Savior. You need Christianity to atone for your sins. Because no matter how good of a moral life you live, you know by now it's not good enough. It's not good enough. We're all sinners. I need a righteousness, as I said, I need a creditor, a Savior. I need a righteousness credited to me that I don't have or could ever have in my life. I need a substitute. I need a redeemer. I need a sacrifice paying a price that I myself can't pay with anything that I have other than my own life, and then that I lose my life. I think of a quote from Auden, the poet Auden. Trying to remember it now. I just got the note Auden here. And nothing that is possible can save us. We who must die demand a miracle. That's how it goes. Nothing that is possible can save us. We who must die demand a miracle. And we have that miracle. We have that miracle in the gospel. We have that miracle in Jesus. We have that miracle in his incarnation, in his life, in his death, and in his resurrection, and is in his promise. And his promise to come back. And this world as we know it is going to end. So as sure as I am about what Christ did for me at the first coming, as sure as I am about that, that's as sure as I can be that he will return. That's as sure as I can be of his second coming. But I admit that is a faith statement. I admit it. It's a faith statement. But it's a faith statement that with Daniel 2 as a background, is backed up with some pretty powerful logical and reason and evidence for it. Evidence that I say again, that is as solid, as objective, as broad, and as unmovable as world history itself, and unchangeable as the past. And that's pretty good evidence. Pretty good, logical, rational evidence to believe in that final kingdom, that kingdom that comes when Jesus returns. I can still remember that first Bible study in that health food store. Gainesville, Florida, 1979. It was over 30 years. I still remember sitting there and them going through that prophecy. And I can still remember just when we got to those feet and those toes. I can still remember, I just burst into tears. And I said, it's all true. It's all true. And I could see they were quite moved. These people were quite moved because they saw somebody brand new, somebody who had no preconceived notions. You know, somebody, you know the phrase tabula rasa. I mean, I wasn't completely tabula rasa, but I didn't know much or nothing about anything about the Bible. And then I saw this powerful, powerful evidence. Powerful, logical evidence. And I remember just saying, man, it's all true, because they shall mingle themselves with the seed of men. I mean, European Union. I mean, these people can't even agree on the plugs. You go to Europe, you got to use a different socket for every other country you got to go through, because they don't even agree on the sockets. Man, they're going to get unified? I mean, come on. I mean, the whole European Union thing is falling apart already. Surprises, surprises. But that was over 30 years ago, which seems so far in the past for me in one sense, but what is it but a breath, a little breath amid the harsh winds of history as depicted in these medals of the prophecy. And what about these empires of silver, gold, bronze, and clay? I mean, what are they compared to? The final kingdom, which Daniel says, which the Word of God says, which shall never be destroyed, and the kingdom shall not be left to other people, but it shall break in pieces and consume all these kingdoms, and it shall stand forever. He's been right on all the other ones. I mean, if you just want to go on sheer odds alone, you got to be crazy to gamble against him on the last one. And that's the promise of a kingdom and a city whose foundation, which has foundations, whose builder and maker is God. And because Daniel was so right about the first four kingdoms, how reasonable and rational then to trust him on the fifth one, the one that lasts forever, the one guaranteed us, promised us through the blood of Jesus.